1.2. We're live, folks. Welcome back. This is House Corrections and Institutions Committee. And this is Tuesday, February 17th. And we're going to be working on H549, which is the draft 1.2, dealing with our non-driver ID and also our driver's license. So it's draft 1.2. Say, I know you gave me a copy, right?
Yes.
Where'd it go?
I don't know.
Oh, you know where it is? Under the folder. Okay, let me hand out something to you too first. This came from Nancy Prescott from DMV that kind of just lays out all the different types of Vermont licenses. So that might help folks too.
Thank you.
Oops, thank you, Judy. So we have a new draft, and Hillary, I'm gonna turn it over to you now. We're gonna do the best we can with language today. I'm sure we're gonna have to have another draft, but I'm scheduled to go into Senate Transportation tomorrow at 11:45. So I will present to them what we have at this point. Be very clear with them that we'll probably be doing another draft, is my hunch. But what the intent will be for that other draft, I'll let them know. Okay? So it's all yours, Hillary. And have your previous drafts before you, folks.
So for the record, Hillary Cheddar Ames for the Office of Legislative Counsel. Should be able to pull up on my screen the new language in just a moment.
So what you've done here is incorporate the DMV language in a strike all amendment to our H549, correct?
Correct. So this H549 draft number 1.2 contains all of the changes from the miscellaneous motor vehicle bill and this committee discussed for H549 to subdivision M or subsection M. It also, that's in section 1, it also contains the changes that Damien talked about from the miscellaneous motor vehicle bill related to providing licenses and permits to individuals who have been sentenced for more than 6 months in sections 2 and 3. So we're working with the same 3 pieces that we have been previously in this new draft, all in one place.
Are new folks clear on that? Okay.
Much easier to look at it in one place. What's
That was the host.
Much easier to look at in one spot.
Oh,
And you've restructured M as well.
Yes, and my apologies for having trouble pulling this up. All right, great. Okay, so as I mentioned, we have 3 sections that we're working with in this draft. Section 1 about non-driver identification cards. This is only changes with respect to individuals who have been detained for 6 or more months. Section 2 is talking about operators' licenses. That is for folks who have been sentenced to serve for 6 or more months, and same for learners' permits in section 3. So those kind of 3 pieces we're working with, and we can dive right into section 1. So, as you might remember, in the previous draft of H549, there were more edits to section or subsection M because the original proposal of the bill was to provide non-driver identification cards for both individuals who have been sentenced to more than 6 months and those who have been detained for 6 or more months. This shifts that because the committee's request was for language that provides just documentation, required documentation to individuals who have been detained for 6 months or more. So subsection M makes a few small changes to current law. On lines 10 through 12 of page 1, these are just for kind of clarity and more common usage in statutes now. So referring to anyone who is sentenced in a correctional facility instead of committed to the custody of the Commissioner of Corrections. This change is also reflected in section 2 and 3, where the miscellaneous motor vehicle bill language kind of copied this same structure to talk about the licenses and permits. Shifting.
So hang on, I just want to be clear. So submission of documents required. So for a non-real ID, what would be required is their social security number, their residency. That's for the non-real ID. For the real ID, they would need residency, social security, and birth certificate or passport. Correct? So that's going to be important to know, whoever's reporting the bill. That's going to be important to know what documentation is needed. Okay? And this language here came from the Department of Motor Vehicles.
Correct. The changes on lines 14 through 15 were to specify those different kinds of documentation. So far, the changes to subsection M are really kind of aligning the statutory language with current practice. They're all kind of clarity changes as opposed to really substantive changes. This is true also if you look on page 1, lines 19 through 20. Instead of referring to whether someone wants to obtain a non-driver identification card or any driving credential, this specifies the other kinds of credentials. So non-driver identification card, operator's license, or replacement learner's permit. Our first.
So,
Yep.
So as part of the reentry planning, DOC would ask the person if they would like to obtain a non-driver card, operator's license, replacement learner's permit, if eligible for those, and inform the individual of the differences, including any cost to the individual. So it could be, a cost could be, particularly for the operator's license or the learner's permit, they've been expired for a long, long time. And they would have to renew and go through the whole renewal process, and that would be at the offender's cost. Correct?
If they were,
Nancy, could you identify yourself for the record?
Nancy Prescott, Director of Operations at DMV. If the individual has expired for more than 3 years, they would then have to retest at their expense.
And they would do the retest once they're released. And who would be responsible to bring the identification documents to DMV? Would it be the offender, or is DOC going to gather that prior to their release?
So in the statute refers to DOC coordinating with DMV to provide the card for the individual at the time of release.
It would be the non-driver ID,
Correct.
not the driver's license or the permit.
That'll be in section 2. Happy to skip there, or we can finish the other changes to section 1 and stick with non-driver ID and then move toward that statutory language. I'm happy to do whatever the committee prefers.
Let's go to section 2, because I want to make sure the documentation, because it's different. What's in M only pertains to the non-driver ID. Doesn't pertain to operator license or replacement the learner's permit if it's beyond the 3 years or 2 years.
Correct. So on page 4,
The committee members following this?
Mhm.
so skipping ahead to section 2, which is about licenses. So now we're looking at what the statute says, or what the bill proposes the statute say about operators licenses and the procedure. So on page 4, lines 3 through 7, if an individual would like to obtain an operator's license pursuant to the provisions of this section and is eligible, so we have someone who has a license that expired 3 years or less, the Department of Corrections shall coordinate with the Department of Motor Vehicles to provide an operator's license to the individual at the time the individual is released from the custody of the Commissioner of Corrections.
And that's for sentenced folks.
Correct, because as drafted right now,
That's
section 2 and 3, operator's license and learner's permit are only provided to individuals who have.
So hold off, Joe.
all
I
right.
know where you're going, but hold up. So I just want to be clear on page 4, line 4 through 7.
Mhm.
The DOC needs to coordinate with DMV in terms of providing that operator's license. So that would assume that DOC, and I know we have Monique Sullivan on Zoom here. That would mean the DOC would coordinate with DMV in terms of the mechanics of this, how to get the documentation? Or am I assuming something wrong here? How would they coordinate? What are they coordinating?
Happy to have someone else jump in. The statute says they shall coordinate.
What are
My
they?
understanding is that that DOC and DMV then have a memorandum of understanding that spells out exactly how that process will work.
And Nancy, DMV,
Yeah,
and Monique, feel free to hop in. We currently already do have a process in place with DOC currently for those that are incarcerated for 6 months or more. This language to extend if eligible for a permit and or a license is not adding anything different for, between the two parties for the individual being released to receive.
But is it laid out somewhere so that should you or your counterpart in DOC not be there in the future, that someone else would know how to do this?
Oh, absolutely. I don't do the work. We have an amazing team that does the work, but we do have an MOU that's
Okay.
outlined.
Okay, perfect.
so what that entails is DOC submits the ID documentation. That could be the residency, social security, and it could be their birth certificate. I'm not gonna have a passport. Vermont birth certificate. The DOC submits that prior to release to DMV, and DMV processes the new license. And then when the person's released, they go to DMV and pick it up, or the license goes right to DOC.
It all goes to DOC currently for those that are incarcerated upon their release. Their case, they get all mailed to Waterbury address for DOC and they go to their caseworkers is what I understand from Monique.
So the same thing would happen with the driver's license and the
Same
license.
process.
So when they would leave the facility, they would have that in hand. And that as long as within that 3-year window for the driver's license and 2-year window for the learner's permit, there would be no charge.
That's correct.
DMV would pick up the price at $3.30 per license. Got it?
For identification card.
No, driver's
Only
license,
license.
driver's
All of the
license.
above, whatever the individual is eligible for of the highest. We're trying to get our goal is to get the individuals out with the best intent and the highest credential they can.
So you got 3 paths, almost. You got your non-driver's ID, which is current law. So that's being extended to if a person's incarcerated and their driver's license while they've been incarcerated has been expired within 3 years. of
Has
their
not been expired.
Has not, 3 years, has not been expired
More than 3 years.
for 3 years. They can renew that while they're incarcerated. They can also renew a learner's permit while they're incarcerated if it hasn't expired within a 2-year period.
I don't know if I like the word renew, because it's not really renewing. They're gonna be issued a new from us. To me, I'm hearing renew as while they're incarcerated, they would be getting it renewed and remain incarcerated. That's not the intent. The intent is upon release. That's the current language right now for our DMV.
It's like a redo.
So the statute uses replacement instead of renew.
Okay.
Replacement learner's permit.
And replacement of the driver's license upon their release. The driver's license. Good luck explaining this one on the floor.
I'm happy to work with Damien to provide some useful notes to whoever does that.
And Donahue's gonna have a field day.
So to the chair's point, the section requiring that DOC coordinate with DMV to provide the card license permit at the time of release is true in all 3 sections. So we saw that on page 2 for non-driver identification cards, here on page 4 for operators licenses, and it is the same here on page 5 for learner's permits. So at the time the individual is released from the correction facility. If no other questions on this particular issue, I will, excellent. So we will return to section 1.
I guess I do have one.
Mhm.
Now that we're expanding this beyond to include. No, I'm just wondering if there's any benefit to lump those all together.
So these are in 3 different
Yeah, I get
statutory
that, yeah.
sections that cover the 3 different kinds of
Okay.
identification.
Maybe this is my question. Is there any benefit in moving those to a different place in statute so that they're all in the same place?
So that there is like a DOC DMV
Yeah.
intersection. I think I'm happy to talk to Damien about that because Title 23 is something he knows much more than I do.
He was talking about, you could, he was talking about a different way to reference, but what you're thinking is because this is in Title 23, you don't think of looking at it if you're looking at DOC policy.
Yeah.
But this is a real DOC policy as well, and there's nothing about this in Title 28. And Title 28 deals with DOC policy. So no one, if they're looking for corrections, would even know that folks who are incarcerated would be eligible for a non-driver ID, and that we're now expanding if their driver's license hasn't been expired from this one, I'm gonna get confused.
So that's something I'm happy to take back to the kind of Ledge Council team and think about whether there's something we could suggest to put as kind of a placeholder in Title 28 that would direct folks thinking about DOC to this. I'm not sure where else we've done that, but that's something I can look into.
And then would you smush that?
I think it depends. I think my
if it were
initial,
all
well,
referred
so
from?
because this is still kind of DMV's authority to issue these cards, I'm not sure that the suggestion we would make would be moving all of this into
Yeah.
Title 28. I think it would be some kind of stub direction in Title 28 to say DOC is doing this, go look at Title 23 for all the details. And if it's something like that, I'm not sure, we'd be condensing the statutory language at all. I think this is one of those times where, there are kind of 2 concerns.
Yeah.
One, is someone looking in Title 28 going to know this exists? And two, is it easy to look in as few places as possible to get all the information you need? I think it might be hard to do both of those things.
I'll leave it to the lawyers.
Dr. Daniel.
I like the word smush.
She used condense. That's probably a better word.
Smush can be a term. of art.
Smush word.
I'll leave it alone.
Excellent. So that's something that I will look into and report on. Returning to section 1, on page 2, line 5. This is now the new language that would be added to current law regarding non-driver identification cards. So if an individual who is detained for 6 months or more in a correctional facility is eligible for a non-driver identification card under the requirements of this section, the Department of Corrections, as soon as reasonably practicable, shall obtain documentation required for a non-real ID or real ID non-driver identification card and shall provide the individual with the documentation at the time of release.
So DOC would gather the information and keep it in a little Ziploc bag. So the person needs to have been detained a minimum of 6 months. And then at that 6-month time, then DOC can start gathering that information and keep it with the offender belongings, whatever, in a Ziploc bag. When the detainee is released, it could be 2 years from then or a year. It would have that information that then the detainee can bring to the DMV office to receive their non-driver ID.
So either real or non-real, depending on what can be.
Obtained.
That's the thinking. Kevin?
Have we already discussed why it's 6 months,
Because
9 months, or 3 months?
it's 6 months for sentenced. We
For
just
what?
sentence folks, they have to have been sentenced for 6 months, so we're just picking that up
Detained.
for detainees. It's the same thing.
Oh, it's already 6 months for, I got you.
So this mirrors that the current statute says folks incarcerated for 6 months or sentenced for 6 months or more.
Got it.
I'm not sure why that was chosen initially. I can try to find that out, but that's why this also uses 6.
Done enough work, I was just curious.
Okay.
Now this is still page 2, lines 11 through 14. This adds that the Department of Corrections shall coordinate with the Department of Motor Vehicles regarding the documentation required for an individual who is detained for 6 months or more in a correctional facility to obtain a non-real ID or real ID non-driver identification card. So something the committee had discussed last, I believe it was Friday, was including language to capture the process. And so this really mirrors the language already in statute regarding coordination to provide identification cards to individuals sentenced for 6 months or more at the time of release. This has that same shall coordinate language, but instead it's shall coordinate regarding the documentation required. So there is still that kind of process language included with respect to providing the documentation for individuals detained for 6 months or more.
So just to be clear, the non-real ID, the person could use as an ID, but they would not be able to board a plane or access a federal building. And they would not be able to cross over into Canada or Mexico. But it could be used as a regular ID, like to open up a bank account or pick up medication that they would need. That's a distinction between a non-real ID, non-driver ID card, and a real ID, non-driver card.
Is there any value in line 11 to reference the MOU between the two groups? I mean, you've asked the question a number of times, what if you're not working there and somebody else isn't working there? You've answered that there's an MOU. Is there any value in referencing that MOU in line 11 or?
So I will share with you that with, once this goes through regarding detainees in whatever manner it does pass, we will have to, amend our current MOU to include the detainees and what that might look like.
I think generally, when statutory language says shall coordinate, shall agree, that's the enough requirement in statute for the agencies to then enter the MOU, have the working group, whatever it is, to kind of effectuate the statutory requirement.
I'm happy.
It's that.
Man, yeah. I can imagine.
Oh,
Let's wait till we get there. I know you're chomping at the bit, but
And you-
let's wait till
I'm
we.
just trying to figure out where it's gonna go. It's gonna go here, or it's gonna go next, right?
Not
Yeah.
necessarily. No.
You know where I'm going with this?
If you are going towards expanding operators licenses, that probably will not go here
Okay.
because it will go in the operator's license.
Thank you.
Hillary, can we kiss the ground you love?
Everybody knows what I want to talk about. I'll just trust people to nudge me when it's time.
But I have to say, the answer has been, they want to give the highest credentials.
No, Kevin wants to go there too. See?
No, that's what
Yeah.
Nancy has said repeatedly, that that's what they're aiming towards, is the highest credentials.
That's why they proposed the language that they did to the miscellaneous DMV bill.
I think that's your goal. You're
Right.
putting
It is,
something in
yeah.
here to add detainees. I think we're all on the same mission of setting one up for the biggest and best success that we can,
We joined at the
while
head.
keeping people out of DMV and getting what they need.
So he's all browsing your committee cap. Look at this.
I think we need a picture of them.
Actually, we are.
You're born in the same hospital, you ought to be.
It shouldn't be so funny.
So to get where the whole committee is excited to go, apparently, to get where at least some of the committee members are excited to go, the rest of section 1, on the bottom of page 2, just renumbers the sections to reflect that we added a subsection in. And at the end, just notes that this section now uses the term correctional facility, which is defined elsewhere in Title 28. And we're just indicating when we say correctional facility here, we want it to mean the same thing as we say it means in 28 VSA, section 3.
So it's a cross-reference.
It is indeed, there's a cross-reference. Any questions about section 1, which again, section 1 is non-driver identification cards. It now contains language from current statute that refers to individuals incarcerated for 6 or more months. And it proposes adding language for individuals detained for 6 months or more. Non-driver identification cards. Any questions on that before we move on to operators licenses?
That was our original bill.
I guess one thing I will note before we, since technically the end, but I think it'll be useful to mention here. You turn to page 6. Looking at section 4, which is the effective date. There are 2 effective dates proposed in this draft.
Yes.
For the operator's license and learner's permit section, the effective date is July of this year, July 1st, 2026. On line 6, you'll see that section 1 of the act, which is the one we just talked about for non-driver identification cards, shall take effect on January 1st, 2027. There was witness testimony that some time would be needed to be ready to implement this. So again, for the committee to decide,
So
am I in on the joke or not on this one?
no, if you do what it wants, section 2 and 3 may have to be January 1st.
So we'll put a pin in effective date, but I wanted to mention,
Troy,
Currently, right now.
as currently drafted, since we were talking about the different sections, I just wanted to mention that this non-driver identification section, as drafted, will take effect January 1st, 2027. And as drafted, the other sections take effect on July 1st. If further edits are needed to the section as the committee moves forward, that can be arranged.
Roy, our troublemaker.
It's just,
A lot of corrections reform needs to happen. This is to the iceberg, tip of the iceberg.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, sir.
But in different
Yeah, I was
directions.
gonna say.
Different side of the coin.
Policy decisions for all of you.
One's going there and the other one's going there.
All right, page 3, section 2. We are now talking about replacement operators licenses. So this is now a driving credential.
I'm sorry.
Page 3, top of page 3. And so, as we mentioned before, the way that the motor vehicle Title 23 is laid out, there are different sections depending on what kind of credential you're talking about. So non-driver ID card is in a section early in the title, DMV. Operators licenses are their own kind of chapter later, and learner's permits are also in their kind of own part of Title 23 later. That's why we have these kind of 3 different sections amending 3 different sections of Title 23. And if you have more detailed questions about Title 23, I will phone a friend and we will ask Damien. All right, so on page 3, this is the same language that Damien walked through last week, and I'll just point out the few changes here. As I mentioned in talking about section 1, the language that we propose using to kind of be the most updated language that we're using to refer to folks sentenced to serve in correctional facilities will be 6 months or more in a correctional facility, not in the custody of the Commissioner of Corrections. So these, this section now includes that same language that we changed, or the bill proposes changing in section 1. The other change that came up in testimony was on page 3, lines 11 through 12. This is referring to the timing of when the card will be provided. And the original draft didn't carry over some language in the current statute on non-driver identification cards. So the bill draft now includes the timing language in advance of release from a correctional facility. So when must the individual be provided with the replacement license in advance of release from a correctional facility? The same language that is used with regard to when the non-driver identification card must be provided.
So Nancy, for us, if our driver's license is not expired for more than 3 years, we can get a replacement.
For you,
Yeah, I mean, here it's saying, you're just putting that 3 years in there just for folks who are incarcerated or for
Oh, no.
anyone?
no, it's for anyone.
It's for anyone.
Yes,
And the same for the learner's permit is 2 years.
that's correct.
And then after that 3 year for a driver's license, then you would have to go through a new driver's test and a test. But for anyone, I think this is gonna be really important for it. Report this on the floor. For us, right now, if our driver's license has expired and it hasn't been expired for more than 3 years, we can renew. If it's been expired for more than 3 years, we would have to go through a road test. We'd have to go through testing again to get a license. So we're only extending the same thing that's for us to folks who are incarcerated. That's going to be really important to say on the floor because many people don't realize that for ourselves. And people could interpret this that we're doing something special for folks who are incarcerated.
Yep.
So that has to be made very clear, whoever's reporting this on the floor.
Do we pay for that replacement driver's license?
For us,
If it's been expired for 2 years and I ask for a replacement license, do I pay?
For you?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So
Unless you're
so we are
incarcerated.
giving the incarcerated something that we don't get.
DMV commissioner is absorbing the cost of the credential for inmates sentenced, what do we call it? Sentenced.
Individuals who are
Individuals
sentenced.
who have been sentenced for 6 months or longer.
And we've had that in place for the non-driver ID, so we're only extending it out to license. For a non-driver ID, for us to go in and get a non-driver ID, we would have to pay. But we have worked up 8 years ago, 9 years ago.
2017, I think.
Yeah, the DMV and DOC to work through that, and DMV accepting the cost. And it's $3.30. Now, if they want to go for an enhanced, then they have to pay for it.
You're making me proud.
2 more weeks, we'll get it down pat.
I'm shocked.
But I want to make sure I understand. I'm not incarcerated. My license is expired. I request a replacement license 2 years after it expired. Do I pay for that or
Yes.
don't I? I do,
Yes,
but if I'd been incarcerated, I wouldn't.
that's correct.
So we are giving a special privilege to them. I'm not against it, but
Well, Kevin, you found an end around to get a free license.
There you go.
it's an expensive way to get it, but I mean,
Yeah, well, yeah.
but I just want to make sure it's clear because we are giving a
Yes.
benefit, but we
And
don't.
in here it does say
Non-incarcerated person.
That's the license fee for 0 in each section.
Correct.
That's
And
what I did.
the little asterisks are previously in the site. Yes, exactly. That means that there is a chunk of the section that is not duplicated in the bill because it is long and not being changed. But my recollection is that in that section that is removed is where it talks about the fees for folks who are not incarcerated. All right, any other questions? I don't want to walk through section 2 and 3 to repeat everything Damien said. I just wanted to flag those 2 changes that he made. But if there are any questions about either of them, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise,
Right, yeah.
You're on.
And this is just bringing into the conversation, a conversation I was having with Nancy and Brett Minier before we were on camera about, let's just simplify this and make all of this available to anyone who has been sentenced or detained for 6 months or more.
How does Kevin feel about this?
We're aligned with you. Yeah. I honestly, I think administratively, it would be easier, right? Once somebody hits that 6-month mark as a detainee, the documents are ready or prepared. And if they get released as a detainee, they have the same access. So it's
They would have the same access, but they would bring that information down to DMV and they would have to pay for it. Or how would that work? Because with a non-driver ID, we're thinking for detainees, I'm just thinking this through, for detainees, DOC would gather the documentation, hold it until they're released. But sometimes they are released, they're not automatically sentenced, sometimes they are released. Hand them the Ziploc bag with their documentation. They would go down to the DMV office and submit that, and they would pay for the non-driver ID, right?
So currently you have proposed for detainees, which is new for DOC/DMV to work through. That is one of the reasons we have asked for January 1st, 2027. That is going to be a new process for us that we have to adapt the system for the 0 fees for detainees. Because the individuals are going to be coming to DMV with what we work out with DOC of what we need from the MOU, specifically to note that that is an individual that meets the criteria for us to process at 0 fees. No matter if it was going to be specifically the committee's desire for non-driver ID, or if you open it up to include the permits and the license if eligible. Same process that we are going to have to work through for detainees, because it doesn't exist right now for us. And it's going to take a little bit of a left path than our current process
So I'm proposing that when that happens, it just matches what's in place for sentenced folks at zero cost. That's what I propose.
Well, I was gonna say mirror, but Joy just said what I was gonna say. I just from the social side of it, of releasing people back into society with the best possible structure is best for society, let alone the person. So I would agree that make the detainee language match the other language. But
One note,
uh-oh.
as currently drafted for the non-driver identification card for individuals detained for 6 months or more, it only refers to DOC obtaining the documentation.
Yeah.
It does not specify receiving the card for $0 fee, a $0 fee, no fee. If the committee wanted the bill to reflect that, we can make that change, but I just wanted to point out that as currently drafted, DOC is required to collect the documentation, give it to the individual, but as currently drafted, when the individual goes to DMV, the statute does not require that DMV provide that card at no cost.
Okay. I think it should be at no cost. What was I gonna say? I had another really brilliant point to make, and now I can't remember it.
Grocery store.
You wanted the card delivered to the released individual as
No.
opposed to them having to go to the DMV.
No, we can't do that because of the unpredictability of the release
You
of detainee, yeah.
can have
oh.
it for the license.
And it's probably for those folks who have been detained for at least 6 months, but maybe not a year or not 2 years. There's a strong likelihood that they'll have an ID, right? That this is a moot point for a lot of them. I don't know what the numbers are. I don't know if we have those numbers. But for the folks who don't have an ID, to James's point, we are removing a hurdle to what it takes to have a smooth transition back into society. I would like to make that transition as smooth as possible.
I'm looking at DOC. I think they have some concerns. Haley, Monique, somebody?
No concerns. The only thing that I would want to make sure is that it's clear that DOC does not have to provide the actual ID
Right.
for someone who's detained.
Right.
And
Because
the,
it's unpredictable.
correct. And the process that we've spoken, just our little group of trying to navigate this proposal was the individual would get them, we keep calling it the little Ziploc bag, from DOC. They are then, there you go. If they come to DMV, great. If they don't come to DMV, that's as well. They come to DMV, we're gonna have some criteria that is gonna note that they are who they are and are eligible. They're gonna have the form completed, which is going to include their residency. That is where the credential is going to be mailed to. We do not print any of these in-house anymore.
Right.
So they're gonna come from the factory out of state to their home, not to DOC in Waterbury as we do for those that are sentenced. That's where part of our process is pivoting.
Right.
And
But DOC would be making sure that the detainee would leave with their residency, their social security number, as well as their Vermont birth certificate,
Yeah, if those documents aren't.
if they're available.
Yeah.
And then it would be up to the person, once they're released, once the detainee is released, to go to the local DMV office and submit that information.
that's correct.
Then DMV verifies the person is who they are. And then when the license is processed, there'd be no fee to the defendant, to the detainee, but you would mail that license to their residence.
That's correct.
Where's the committee to extend the renewal of the driver's, I'm gonna say renewal, of the driver's license and learner's permit to detainees as well as the sentence folks? Where's the committee?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Yes.
So the reason that these documents for the detainees aren't being mailed to Waterbury's is the uncertainty of when the detainee is released.
Yeah,
That's
Right.
fine. Okay.
so they're not gonna get the license until they're released. So for a person who's sentenced, that they have applied for their license within that time frame, would the license for those folks would be mailed to the facility or to Waterbury?
For those that have been sentenced, that's correct, because they're working about 1 to 2 months ahead of time, because they know when the individual is getting released, as I believe Monique had mentioned, and correct me if I'm wrong, like that with the detainee, they could go to court that day, is my understanding, and not know, but there's a good chance those individuals are not even in the back,
But
getting
then,
released.
so then how do they get their credentials in that scenario?
That-
Not the ID, how do they get their bag?
Their
of-
little Ziploc bag.
Yeah,
Monique had explained that, I believe, last week, and again, not my lane, so.
No, that's accurate. People will return to the facility very briefly to gather their belongings.
so,
But you make sure you have that 6-month window.
yeah.
It's not the churn of people coming in and coming out. It's a 6-month window. When that 6-month hits, DOC will be gathering the person's residence and their social security number. And if they're Vermont, they can access their Vermont birth certificate and keep all that information in a little bag and put it with the inmates or the detainees' belongings. So that when they are released, that's part of their belongings that DOC gives them.
And I think, sorry, Monique also mentioned this last week, and it slipped my mind, but nowadays the court proceedings are done at the facility remotely. So people might not even be leaving the facility for their court appointments.
So could it not be cleaner just for DOC to submit those documents in their behalf, just like a sentenced person, and then to mail the ID after? That's
They might be holding it for 2 or 3 years, couple of years. Because the detainee could be there. Once they hit that 6 month, it doesn't mean that they're gonna be going to court. They may not go to court for another year. So then DMV would end up holding all that.
We don't want to be responsible for people's social
Sure,
security
yeah.
cards and birth certificates or anything like that.
So then you have somebody getting a let's say a non-driver's real ID who's lives in Richford, doesn't have a car, and has to make it down to St. Albans to do this stuff. I think I fear you have some people just not avail themselves of the opportunity. It is what it is.
It's just with detainees, you just never know when they're gonna be released. And some detainees will end up being sentenced. Not all detainees are released. Some will end up being sentenced. A good portion of them end up being sentenced.
But if you're gonna hand somebody their baggie of credentials to bring to DMV,
But you're detainees.
that's your detainee. How's that different than just saying, hey, we know where you're moving and we're gonna submit this on your behalf? And then have
Because they don't always know where they're moving.
because we don't know where they're moving.
Yeah, they could just get released right from court to who knows where.
Okay, all right.
Haley said they come back temporarily.
Some.
To take their.
Some do,
Some.
some do.
Yeah.
Some or.
Or the proceeding is done remotely, which I think is more common than not at this point. And so an individual is having their court hearing at the facility and then they're released, so they're already there.
All right,
So your issue, Joe, is for them, once they leave the facility, they have to get to a DMV office and transportation could be an issue. That's your
I
issue.
just think you're dealing with a population that might not have the best ability to accomplish tasks. And it's trying to remove that task from the plate, if you will. But if I understand, if you don't know where they're moving, how are you supposed to do that? In which case you just hand them their documents and hope that they avail themselves of it. I mean, to walk around in society without a form of identification is a huge impediment, so.
This takes me back to last session where it blew my mind that someone could be picked up. Not gonna use the right words, they're arraigned. But then they're transported to a different facility, but somehow their personal items are left here. They may not have a driver's license, they may not have a car here, so they don't have what they need. Why doesn't that baggie go with them wherever they go?
Could be used for evidence for law enforcement.
Pardon me?
Law enforcement may hang on to it, their belongings. Could be law enforcement that hangs on to it. It's not the court
Right,
that
right.
hangs on to it. It's law
Whoever's
enforcement.
transporting them has the responsibility of transporting the person and the baggie, no matter what. So if the person comes back, the baggie comes back. If the person gets released, the baggie goes with them. That to me seems like it would be logical, but last session, we couldn't seem to figure out why that wasn't happening.
I can speak to that process in its entirety, and I'll let Moni jump in too if you have anything to add, but to the chair's point, there could be instances in which someone's wallet is used for evidence, and so the person who transports them wouldn't be able to take that to a correctional facility. There are all types of instances, and I don't know how consistent each one is.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Monique, do you want to weigh in on that, or did Haley summarize it well?
Haley summarized it, excuse me, very well. Sometimes the individual doesn't come in with ID. Sometimes law enforcement holds on to the ID. And some people bring in a driver's license and their social security card. And every once in a while, somebody brings in their birth certificate. Like, so people have either some or none of the identification documents.
It depends on the circumstance in which they were arrested.
Right.
And then it depends, if they were arrested and immediately sent to a facility to be arraigned the next day, it's a whole different situation than if they were charged and told to show up in court a month later for an arraignment.
This evidence, I understand.
Nothing is linear in the world, particularly in courts and DOC. So for the committee, it's a policy change. Do we also extend the opportunity to detainees for them to, I'm going to say renew, for them to continue having a driver's license if they have entered the facility with a driver's license or it has expired no more than 3 years prior, once they hit that 6-month timeframe?
Fine with it.
We okay with that, to
Yes.
extend it to detainees?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to confirm, that is using the same process of DOC providing the documentation, not DMV providing the license or the permit, right?
Correct.
And at zero cost? Adding at zero cost?
If that is the committee's direction.
Is that, where are we on that one?
Well, I would throw that to Nancy at least.
A credential's a credential's a credential, $3.30 for a credential, whether it's a
So-
non-driver ID or whether it's a license. So our mission is to get somebody up with the highest eligibility requirement that they are able to. That would be a license. It's the same cost as you saying and proposing a non-driver.
Then do it.
$3.30.
Do it.
If they want the enhanced, then they pay the difference.
Not
Enhanced.
Don't go
I
down.
know, but if they,
We're-
Yeah, they
Yeah,
pay
the
the
language
difference,
doesn't
right?
say anything regarding enhanced.
okay, so it's totally silent on that. It is only for the non-real ID or the real ID driver's license.
Non-driver ID or license to your highest eligibility.
But not the enhanced.
At no
And
cost.
not the real ID either.
No, we could do a real ID.
Okay.
It's the real
Yes,
ID.
whatever documents that are provided to us, we will try to do the best that we can to match up to the highest.
Or just not the enhanced.
Correct. No shopping in Montreal.
There you go.
But if the person wanted the enhanced, I'm just thinking
can
this through
pay
because
for
I'm
it.
preparing for a question on the floor, folks. Once it leaves this committee room, it can take on a whole life of its own. If the person who is detained wants an enhanced, they have the documentation for the real ID. They go to DMV, they want an enhanced, and they have their birth certificates with them, their birth certificate with them. Then what happens on the DMV?
And they want an enhanced, we'll give them what's at zero fees and anything in addition that the individual wants, they would be paying themselves out of pocket. Which, not to blurry the lines, because we're not talking about it, but it should be mentioned because enhanced keeps coming up. This is a plain Mary Jane license. This is not a motorcycle endorsement. This is not any other types of endorsements. This is a driving credential. Or non-driver. ID.
CDLs.
Yes, no endorsements.
Just a plain old
It's a driving credential.
drive your little old vehicle.
So is everyone in favor of adding that?
Yes.
Yes.
Are you okay with what I just?
Yes.
Okay.
So the two changes I have from the committee are taking the language that we have for providing, for DOC providing the documentation for a non-driver identification card, using that same language for an operator's license and a learner's permit, and then providing any of those at no cost. And the no cost will refer to plain Jane version of the card or license. I can work with Damien on an amendment that does that, and I will also look into what we might suggest regarding something in Title 28 or any other suggestions we can make regarding how to flag this for someone looking at DOC and not DMV, and whether there's any way to kind of pull more of it into one place to make it easy to reference. I can't promise I can accomplish those, but we will work on some ideas.
Let's keep going through the language. I think it's important to keep going through the language on page 3. For the replacement license, even though people think you might know it, when you read the language, you might think of something you haven't thought of.
I'm just rejoining and I can share my screen again.
Because on the floor, everybody has a driver's license and they think they know everything about driver's license. So be prepared for questions. Just want people to be prepared. I don't want to get caught out there and not have an answer.
So for section 2 on a replacement license, we talked about subsection C, that an individual who is sentenced to 6 months or more, if the license has expired not more than 3 years prior, they're eligible for a replacement license. That's subdivision A. And that in advance of release from a correctional facility, if they submit the application and documentation required, they'll be provided with a replacement operator's license for a fee of $0.
So whoever reports this bill is going to have to talk to Ways and Means about this. It's going to go to Ways and Means because there's the word fee. So it'll go to Ways and Means. I don't believe it'll go to appropriations, but you never know. So just shooting a heads up.
Moving forward, we're still on page 3, line 14. Subdivision 2. An individual has to provide proof of Vermont residence and their mailing address upon release from the correctional facility to get the replacement operator's license.
And it will be DOC that gives them that little packet.
Now on line 18, this is subdivision 3. We touched on this. This is the same kind of procedure that is in the non-driver identification card language that is part of reentry planning. DOC will ask each individual about whether they want to obtain a non-driver ID card, operator's license, or replacement learner's permit if they're eligible, and let the individual know what documentation is required and if there are any associated costs. And as the chair flagged, this would all be at no cost except for an example where an individual's license expired more than 3 years prior, in which case they are outside of the requirements of this provision and they're paying for a regular license. Page 4, line 3, this is subdivision 4. Again, this is the kind of same language about DOC and DMV coordinating. So this is the kind of like MOU trigger language DOC and DMV coordinate to provide that license at the time the individual is released from DOC custody.
Mhm.
And page 4, line 8, just like we saw in the first section, making clear that we're using the same correctional facility definition that is used to apply for Title 28. So on page 4, line 10, we're now in section 3. So remember, section 1 is non-driver ID cards, section 2 is operator's license, and section 3 is learner's permit. This includes the reference that usually a learner's permit costs $24. But on line 16, subdivision 4, a replacement learner's permit issued pursuant to subsection G, which we'll talk about, will be issued for a fee of $0. And now we have subsection G on line 19, that, just like we saw above, an individual sentenced to serve a period of imprisonment of 6 months or more, who has an unexpired learner's permit, or who held a learner's permit issued under the provisions of this section that expired not more than 2 years prior.
Really?
Yes.
So that's you just said Commissioner of Corrections there instead of correctional facility.
We'll make that technical uniformity correction on the next
I'm
round.
just curious.
You're right. No, you're,
It could have been a reason. You never know.
I noticed that as we were going through, and my little mental note said, we'll make that change throughout. So bonus points for you.
First time I've done something right all day.
So if the person's learner's permit has expired not more than 2 years prior, they're eligible for a replacement learner's permit, as the section provides. They have to apply and submit all the required documents. And in advance of release from a correctional facility, they will be provided with the replacement learner's permit. Subdivision 2.
Whoa.
Happy to pause for questions.
Be provided with. That kind of implies they're gonna have it upon their release. It doesn't imply going down to the DMV.
So as drafted, sections 2 and section 3 for licenses and permits are under, we kind of have 2 tracks, right? We have folks who have been incarcerated.
This is sentence.
Yeah.
As drafted, this is sentence. So we're on track 1 for sentence folks.
Got me nervous.
They get the
This is
card, the license, the permit upon release from the facility.
Right.
Our other track,
Detainees.
individuals who are detained, and that will be the, yes, exactly. That'll be the provided with documents upon release.
And we're doing detainees for learners permits as well, right, folks?
Yes.
Yes, but they
Yes.
simply
Okay.
get documents that you're not getting.
Okay.
Permit.
Yes, there will be a new subsection or subdivision here that I will confirm with Damien exactly how to format it, but we'll take that same language that we had for non-driver identification cards and use the appropriate version for operators licenses and learners permits. So again, here, this is page 5, lines 8 through 11. To get a learner's permit, the individual needs to provide proof of Vermont residence and their mailing address upon release from custody. Again, point to James here. This will be released from correctional facility. And then page 5, lines 12 through 16, subdivision 3. Again, this is the, as part of reentry planning, DOC needs to ask each individual what they want.
Mhm.
Let them know what their options are, what the cost will be. Line 17, subdivision 4. Again, this is that kind of MOU trigger language. DOC shall coordinate with DMV to provide the replacement learner's permit. To Troy's earlier point about, is there some way to not say coordinate many times? We'll take a look when we add the language about providing documentation for detained folks, whether there's a more streamlined way to say this. It may be easier to say it in 2 places, but we'll keep an eye on that.
I want to go back to lines 8 through 11, because I keep reading this.
This is page 5, lines 8 through 11. Yep.
This is probably the same language it's on. For the replacement license as well. To obtain the permit pursuant to this subsection. the individual be required to provide proof of Vermont residency and their mailing address upon release from the custody of the Commissioner of Corrections. But above on B, they already have to provide that in order to have DOC submit that.
So the way we have subdivision, this is subsection G, and we have subdivision 1 and subdivision 2. So subdivision 1 kind of lays out the existence, right? Subdivision 1 said, if you meet these 2 requirements,
You're eligible.
you're eligible. Subdivision 2 specifies you have to submit these things in order to obtain the replacement learner's permit.
But you release it upon release. And the DOC is not receiving that information upon the release of that person.
I think I understand your question. So on line 10, the upon release refers to the mailing address. And I'll think about whether there's a way to make that even clearer, right? So there are 2 things happening in subdivision 2.
But this is for sentence folks. So would the learner's permit get sent to Waterbury?
Yes,
So you wouldn't need the mailing address.
Still needs to be.
yes, we do.
Yes, they have to provide it.
Yeah.
in order
So
to-
you would need that in the documentation
Mhm.
the DOC submits, which is done 2 months
Yes.
prior to release. It's not done upon release. That's what I'm getting at. Looks like,
So, yep, there are 2 things that could be upon release. There could be, are you getting the address? Like, is DOC upon release getting the address? Or are you talking about where the person's mailing address will be when they are released? And on line 10, it's that second version. So the individual has to provide this in advance of release, but it's whatever their mailing address will be when they are released.
why do you need to know their mailing address upon release if they've already received the learner's permit while they're incarcerated? This is for sentence folks. So the process is, I'm just going through this. Person is sentenced. They're eligible to renew their learner's permit. DOC submits what is needed for ID and residency as part of that to DMV. DMV processes it. This was done a couple months prior to their release date. And then DMV mails that permit to the Waterbury Central Office that then gets sent to whatever facility the person is at. And that's done a few months prior to release.
1 to 2 months. And with that caveat, just like everyone here at the table, including us, we have the responsibility to change our address and update our address with DMV per law,
That's right.
as do they. If they, for whatever reason, don't have an address outside of the Waterbury address, and it comes later, they have a responsibility to update DMV. We all do.
So is the answer to the chair's question that DMV still needs the mailing address upon release for purposes other than mailing a card to the individual at that address?
Yes.
It's not to obtain the replacement permit. The way it's written, it's to obtain the learner's permit. The individual would need to provide a proof of Vermont residency and the mailing address upon release. But they've already provided that to obtain the permit prior to the release. They did that 2 months prior. So it just, I keep going back to that. It's the information's already been submitted. Is the committee following?
Yeah.
Fine.
I'm trying.
So
Maybe I'm reading it wrong, but it looks like to obtain that permit, you need to provide those 2 things upon release.
But that,
So that's not the way, that's not the
It's not-
intent
Right.
of subdivision two, that,
That's what it looks like. Now, maybe I'm reading it wrong, but that's what it looks like.
I'm happy to chat with Damien about whether there is a clearer way to say that. I think what helps me as a reader have a clear sense of what I think it means is to look at both subdivision B on lines 5 through 7 and subdivision 2. That it's clear that when we talk about providing the required documentation, we're submitting that in advance of release from the correctional facility. And 2 is just kind of a separate, these things, to be able to get the permit under the subsection, you have to provide proof of your Vermont residence and your mailing address, whatever your mailing address will be when you are released.
Speaking about
Did you just say
line
prior
10,
to release instead of upon release?
Well, so you're not, the upon release isn't modifying when you have to submit it. It's modifying the address. So we could change the upon release, since we've used upon release elsewhere to refer to when you get the card. We could use mailing address after release or at release. We could use something a little different to make clear what we're talking about.
So the issue is the mailing address, not so much proof of Vermont residence. It's more the mailing address.
They've already provided the proof of Vermont residency with the
You
documentation.
could just say current mailing address. The individual's current mailing address.
Would be required to provide the individual's current mailing address here upon release and take out proof of Vermont residence, because you've already done that, right?
But if you say current mailing address upon release, those are two different things.
So just
So-
current mailing.
yeah, I think it makes sense the way it is, line 10, because when they're applying for this permit, they're providing proof of Vermont residency along with what their mailing address is intended to be upon release from custody.
It's not their mailing address intended to be, it's their, the way that's reading, it looks like you submit your proof of Vermont residency and your mailing address upon release. But you have to submit that in B in order to get your permit.
So one thing just to confirm, as drafted, the idea is that this card gets mailed to DMV in Waterbury, but it is going to DOC to provide to the individual in advance of release, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
So subdivision 2 isn't saying that the individual to get their card has to show this. It's just saying that generally an individual getting a permit has to be able to provide these two things. So it's really overlapping with the requirement above that you submit all required documentation in advance of release. This is just spelling out the two kinds of required documentation.
To me, it's confusing.
I'm happy to chat with Damien about whether,
Maybe it's me, but what I'm reading, to obtain permit, you need to submit those two things upon release.
And that's possible, but I think Hillary's answer is the best one, which is talk to Damien and try to, you've heard our concerns or some people's concerns. And you can get a better answer with you two talking.
I will say that, yeah. If I wanted subdivision 2 to require an individual upon release to provide proof, I would put upon release much closer to provide, right? So that it was clear that upon release is a trigger for when you have to provide something. Because it's right next to mailing address.
I don't read it that way.
Yeah. And that is one of the beauties of statutory interpretation, is trying to be very clear and avoid reading it two ways. So I will chat with Damien about whether we have some suggestions about clarity there.
So you're going to talk with Damien and get us an answer.
Correct.
Awesome.
So let's keep going. And sorry I interrupted.
Not a problem. We have reached the end. We're on page 6. Again, this is subdivision 5. We're cross-referencing the correction facility definition. And then as I flagged before, on line 3, this is section 4, the effective date. Right now, as drafted, the operator's license and learner's permit sections, sections 2 and 3, shall take effect on July 1st, 2026. Section 1 regarding non-driver identification cards shall take effect on January 1st, 2027. Now that the committee has discussed expanding operators licenses and learners permits to folks who've been detained for 6 months or more, I don't know if there's also a question about whether the rationale for a different effective date of section 1 also applies to sections 2 and 3.
So the rationale for extending that for detainees for the non-driver ID was to allow time for DOC to gather that information once it hits that 6-month period. Because you weren't sure how many people, you had to take care of your process. You had to take care of the internal process.
I think it's more actually, I'll let Nancy speak to this, more to do with DMV than it is with DOC.
So it's your process, the
It's us
system.
editing our computer system to be able to process it at 0 fees in a different manner, because we're gonna be receiving it from the applicant, not DOC directly for detainees.
And you would be doing, would you be doing the same thing with the learner's permit and replacement license? Receiving it, you wouldn't be receiving it, well, you would for the detainees, you would be receiving it from the applicant.
Detainees, everything will come from DOC to the applicant, to DMV. Those that have been sentenced will go directly through DOC to DMV, back to DOC for the credential.
So it's hard to have an effective date specifically for the detainee portion of the replacement license and learner's permit versus the sentence piece for that.
I think if the committee wanted there to be one effective date for anything referencing folks who are sentenced to 6 months or more and a different effective date for folks who are detained, we would just need to structure the sections differently so that we could then say the effective date of the incarcerated folks sections is one thing and the effective date of the other detained incarcerated or detained individuals sections was another.
So you still have the same issue with detainees. For non-driver ID as you do for learner's permit and replacement,
correct.
you've got the same issue within your system. So you're gonna need that time, January 1st, 27.
For detainees only,
Right, not the
not for,
sentence.
that's correct. I just want to be clear on that piece.
This is the detainee only for the non-driver ID and for the replacement license and for the learner's permit. All of that should take effect January 1st, 27.
Mhm.
The sentence piece for the replacement license and learner's permit could take effect July 1st of this year.
That's correct.
So that means it has to be structured in a different way, Hillary.
Mhm.
It's more confusing as we go along. That's why it's gonna take another draft and probably another draft after that.
Happy. The
Curious,
nature of the job is a new draft after a new draft. So
will this enhanced system be able to tell us how many have taken advantage of this no-cost ID system? Will we be able to tell after a year that we issued six?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I know we needed to get the data from DOC regarding the approximate number of detainees. I would have to get back to you on, like, we'll be able to run a report for what we've got for 0 fees. And then from there, we may have to break it out, but I believe there is something we'll be able to build a report So we can have that available for the future. So I'm glad you're asking now. So while we work through the system modernization of that piece, that's something I can explore.
I may be the only ones in.
No, I don't think
No,
so,
it's
because
good
actually
to-
the question got asked in regards to what is the detainees, right? What does that number look like? And just for your recollection, Monique had shared and Haley, it was 188, I think, from 2022 to 2026. So that was approximately 40 additional per year. So the financial burden, if you would, for DMB was still minimal, while the impact to the individual was significantly positive, right? So,
And that was only the number of individuals who had been detained for 6 months or more, so it's likely that that would continue to narrow if someone already had an ID that's valid.
Most of our accountability docket takes care of business in more expeditious fashion and nobody's held more than 6 months. Which would be great.
So was that 40 per year for sentence folks?
No,
That's what you're anticipating for detainees?
that's right.
yes. But potentially smaller, because that number didn't capture anyone's ID status. It was just purely the number of individuals who had been detained for 6 months or more.
Who would qualify?
You have a number in terms of how many folks right now that are sentenced that are receiving the non-driver ID per year?
We do. I can pull it up, but I think,
I would like to have that
yeah,
number.
I think we shared the numbers from FY 24. So let me grab.
Be good to have.
Sort of like the $3.30.
For the credential, not including staff time, not including postage.
I understand.
I think we're just, your mission is to mirror up with our miscellaneous bill that we have in Senate regarding our expansion of language, identifying that you guys had something similar from 549 that you were looking into. Just kind of bringing everything in.
I got it,
Yeah,
right?
right.
465 non-driver IDs were provided from FY 24 to 25. In FY 25 to 26, you're seeing right now about 182.
Great. I have my marching orders on an amendment. Anything further you have for me? On this.
If I can remember all this for tomorrow, 4:12.
I will just state you're presenting this to Senate Transportation
Yeah,
tomorrow,
we're
so.
not gonna have the language done by then.
No, but I was just gonna suggest that if anybody is thinking they might be introducing this, that might be a good thing to watch. Because you're gonna lay it out, regardless of whether or not we have the language. So,
Let me talk to Richie and see if he wants it even before the language is done.
Let me know what you need. I'm happy to be there on change time.
This, we changed it. I mean, I can go in there and explain what we've done, but just no language.
Simplest way is we're mirroring things up.
Yeah.
It truly is. I don't mean to simplify it down, but that's what it seems like. That's exactly the intent and what's happening.
Let me talk to Richie too. See. I won't catch him until tomorrow morning. He's probably gone. Anything else? Or we release Hillary and the whole committee? Anything else, Monique? Are you comfortable? Is DOC comfortable with the direction we're going?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, great. Thank you.
thank you all. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll be back in touch. Let me tell you.
Thank you.
We're gonna schedule a time with Hillary to go through the next draft, and I hope it's fairly soon.
5:30 tomorrow.
All right. Anything else?
Oh, we do.
Thank you, Hillary.
Thanks, Hillary.
Committee, we are done for today. We're back here at 8:30
You two rock and roll.
tomorrow morning. We're gonna be hearing from DOC and WellPath on 8/5/50, which is the gender equity bill.